On the orbital station Helios Prime, where alien dignitaries dined on synthesized perfection, a human chef stood at his grill turning vegetables over open flame. The alien elite sneered at his primitive methods, their children mockingly calling his food burnt plants. But when the daughter of the Zenari ambassador tasted what he created, something shifted in the galaxy's understanding of what food could mean. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. The Grand Pavilion stretched like a cathedral of glass and starlight, suspended in the void between three moons. Tables floated on gravity platforms, each one draped in fabrics that shifted color with the mood of the guests. Alien dignitaries from a dozen worlds reclined in postures humans could not achieve, their jeweled skin catching the light of distant suns. Above them, holographic menus flickered through molecular compositions, dishes assembled atom by atom in pristine laboratories far below the dining floor. And in the corner, beside a window that framed the curve of a gas giant, Dalton Reed stood before a simple charcoal grill. Smoke rose in thin ribbons, gray against the sterile air. The grill was an antique, salvaged from Earth, its grate scarred with the memory of 1,000 meals. Dalton turned asparagus with tongs that had belonged to his grandfather, watching the spears char in lines like musical notation. His apron was stained, his hands were calloused. To the aliens who glanced his way, he was decoration, a curiosity tolerated because the station's charter demanded human representation in all public spaces. Emma knelt beside a crate of vegetables, sorting peppers by color. She was 9 years old, her blonde hair pulled back in a braid that mimicked the one her mother used to wear. Her small hands moved with careful purpose, setting aside the bruised ones, arranging the perfect specimens in rows. She did not speak. The work was its own language. A group of Kylorian merchants passed, their crystalline bodies refracting light into rainbows across the polished floor. One paused, mandibles clicking in amusement. "The human still burns his food," it said to its companion. "How quaint that they cling to destruction as craft." Laughter followed them like perfume. Dalton did not look up. He brushed olive oil across a portobello mushroom, feeling the texture beneath his fingertips, the way the cap absorbed liquid like earth after rain. He set it on the grill and listened to the sizzle, that ancient song of transformation. Emma glanced at him, her green eyes questioning. "It's okay," he said quietly. "They don't understand yet." Across the pavilion, a Valorian server carried a plate of synthesized foam, each bubble containing a precise flavor molecule calibrated to trigger specific neural responses. The diner consumed it with clinical appreciation, nodding at the mathematical perfection. No mess, no smoke, no unpredictability. Dalton turned the mushroom. Char bloomed across its surface like continents forming on a new world. He thought of Sophia, the way she used to say that fire was the first teacher, that everything worth knowing could be learned from watching something change under heat. She had been a botanist, but she understood cooking better than most chefs. She understood that transformation required surrender. The Grand Pavilion hummed with 1,000 conversations in 100 languages. Credits exchanged hands. Alliances formed over courses that dissolved on contact. Power moved through the room like weather. And in the corner, a widowed father grilled vegetables while his daughter sorted peppers, both of them invisible in a galaxy that had forgotten how to see. Kessara moved through the pavilion like liquid mercury, her Zenari skin shifting from cobalt to violet with each step. She was 12 in human years, though her species aged differently, and she carried herself with the certainty of someone who had never been told no. Her eyes were wide and dark, pupils that could expand to capture starlight, and they fixed now on the corner grill with something close to disgust. Behind her trailed 3 companions, children of senators and trade magnates, each one dressed in garments worth more than Dalton's monthly stipend. They whispered in Zenari, a language of clicks and sustained vowels that sounded like wind through crystal caves. "Look at the smoke creature," Kessara said, loud enough to carry. "He makes burnt plants and calls it cuisine." Her friends erupted in laughter, the sound chiming like broken glass. One of them, a Kylorian boy with faceted shoulders, pointed at the grill. My tutor says humans used to cook because they couldn't synthesize. They were too primitive to understand molecular composition. They still are, Kessera replied. She drifted closer, her robes trailing threads of bioluminescent fiber. The smell reached her first, something she had no context for: char and oil and the sweetness of caramelizing sugars. Her nose wrinkled. It smells like burning. Because it is burning, said the Kylorian boy. That's all they know how to do. Emma's hands stilled over the peppers. Her jaw tightened, but she did not look up. Dalton placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle pressure that meant, wait, not yet. Let it pass. Kessera leaned against the railing that separated the grill area from the main floor, a barrier installed to contain the smoke. She watched Dalton lift corn from the grill, the kernels blistered and golden. He set them on a simple ceramic plate. No garnish, no foam, no architectural presentation. Just food. What is that supposed to be? Kessera asked, her voice dripping with theatrical curiosity. Corn, Dalton said without looking at her, grilled over charcoal. And people eat this, the way you've destroyed it? Dalton turned the corn with his fingers, testing the heat. People have eaten this for thousands of years, long before synthesis, long before stations like this existed. Kessera's friends pressed closer, feeding off her cruelty like scavengers. The Kylorian boy made a retching sound. I would rather starve than consume burnt plants. Then starve, Emma said suddenly, her voice small but sharp. The group froze. Kessera's skin flashed crimson, the Zanari expression of indignation. A human child speaks? To me? Dalton's hand tightened on Emma's shoulder, but he did not silence her. Emma stood, still holding a red pepper, her cheeks flushed. You've never even tasted it. You just laugh because everyone else does. Kessera stepped back as if struck. Her pupils contracted to pinpoints. I don't need to taste it to know it's inferior. My father says your kind peaked centuries ago. Your relics. Museum pieces. From across the pavilion, Ambassador Vorin watched the exchange with the detached interest of someone observing weather. He was tall even, for a Zanari, his skin a permanent shade of diplomatic gray. He did not intervene. To him, his daughter's cruelty was education, a lesson in hierarchy. Kessera turned back to her friends, satisfied. Come. The molecular tasting begins in the azure chamber. Real food awaits. They departed in a cascade of light and laughter, leaving only the smell of their expensive perfumes and the echo of their mockery. Emma's hands trembled. Dalton knelt beside her, setting the tongs aside. You did good, he whispered. Standing up matters. She looked at him with eyes too old for her age. Do you think she'll ever understand? Dalton glanced at the corn, still steaming on the plate. I don't know. But we keep cooking anyway. The next evening arrived with the cold precision of a blade. Dalton was prepping his station, arranging vegetables in the order he would grill them, when the pavilion's lights shifted to ceremonial gold. A hush rolled across the dining floor like fog. Emma looked up from her chopping board, knife suspended over a zucchini. Tyrex descended the central stairs with the pageantry of a conquering general. He was Kylorian, his body composed of interlocking crystalline plates that refracted light into weapon-sharp beams. His chef's coat was pure white, structured like armor, and it had never known a stain. Behind him walked his entourage, sous chefs and molecular gastronomists who moved in synchronized formation. The crowd parted. Aliens rose from their tables, sensing spectacle. Tyrex stopped 10 paces from Dalton's grill, his faceted face catching the light in 1,000 angles. He did not speak immediately. He simply stared at the charcoal, at the smoke, at the primitive tongs resting on the grate. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the resonance of grinding stone. This cannot continue. Dalton set down the pepper he was holding. His hands were steady. What can't? Tyrex gestured at the grill as if indicating a wound. This. Your presence in the grand pavilion is a Courtesy extended to your species out of legal obligation. But courtesy has limits. You diminish us. Every meal you burn is an insult to culinary evolution. Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. Some aliens nodded, their various appendages moving in agreement. Others leaned forward, hungry for conflict. "I'm not insulting anyone," Dalton said quietly. "I'm cooking." "You're embarrassing yourself," Tyrex replied. "And by extension, embarrassing this station. Molecular cuisine has transcended the need for fire. We build flavor at the atomic level. We create experiences your primitive methods could never achieve." Emma stepped closer to her father, her small hand finding his. Dalton felt her fingers trembling and squeezed back. He looked at Tyrex, at the crowd, at the floating tables where dignitaries watched like audiences at an execution. "Then what do you want?" Dalton asked. Tyrex smiled, if the geometric shifting of his face could be called that. "Prove yourself. 1 week from tonight, you will prepare a meal for our most esteemed critic, Miraven, of the Valorian court. If she finds value in your burnt plants, you may remain. If not, you close this grill and accept a transfer to waste management, where your talents are better suited." The crowd erupted in approving clicks and hisses. This was entertainment. This was blood sport without the blood. Dalton felt Emma's hand tighten. He thought of Sophia, of the garden she kept on earth before the sickness took her, of the way she would run her fingers through soil and say that everything worth keeping required patience. He thought of the grill his grandfather had given him, the one that had fed 3 generations. He met Tyrex's multifaceted gaze. "I accept." The pavilion exploded in noise. Their quarters occupied a narrow slice of the station's residential ring, 2 rooms with a window that faced the perpetual night. Emma sat on the edge of her bed, still wearing her kitchen clothes, her eyes red from crying she had tried to hide. Dalton moved through the small galley, making tea the old way, heating water over a flame instead of using the instant dispenser. "Are we going to lose the grill?" Emma asked. Dalton poured the tea into 2 mismatched cups, remnants from Earth. He brought one to Emma and sat beside her, the mattress dipping under his weight. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe." She held the cup in both hands, seeking warmth. "Why do they hate us so much?" "They don't hate us." Dalton sipped his tea, choosing words carefully. "They've forgotten something important. And when people forget, they sometimes get angry at anyone who remembers." What did they forget? That food is more than fuel. He set his cup down and stood, moving to the storage cabinet. He pulled out a small wooden box, scarred and ancient. Inside were seeds, dozens of varieties, each one labeled in Sophia's careful handwriting. "Your mother taught me that fire doesn't destroy. It transforms." Emma approached, touching the packets with reverence. She'd heard stories of her mother, but memories at 9 years old were fragile things, more feeling than image. Dalton selected 5 packets: bell peppers, heirloom tomatoes, zucchini, asparagus, portobello spores. "She grew these on Earth, before we came here, before she got sick." He opened the pepper packet, letting Emma see the seeds. "She used to say that everything alive wants to become something else. Seeds want to become plants. Plants want to become food. And food wants to become memory." "How?" Dalton closed the box and returned it to the cabinet. "When you grill a pepper, the heat breaks down the cell walls. Sugars concentrate, flavors intensify. The char adds bitterness that makes the sweetness sing louder. You're not burning it. You're asking it to show you what it's been hiding." Emma touched her teacup, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. "What are you going to cook for Miraven?" "I don't know yet." Dalton moved to the window. Outside, stars hung like distant candles. "But I'm going to choose carefully. Every vegetable has a story. I need to find the ones that will tell the truth." "What truth?" "That we're not relics. That fire is still a teacher." Emma joined him at the window. They stood together, father and daughter, silhouetted against the galaxy. In the reflection, Dalton could see Sophia's face in Emma's features, the same determined set of her jaw, the same green eyes that saw more than most. We'll prep tomorrow, Dalton said. Together, like always, like always, Emma echoed, and in the silence that followed, they both understood that some things were worth fighting for, even when the galaxy had already decided you'd lost. The Grand Pavilion had been transformed into an arena. Floating platforms ringed Dalton's corner grill in ascending tiers, each one packed with alien dignitaries who had paid premium credits for proximity to the spectacle. Holographic displays projected his hands in magnification, every movement broadcast across 100 screens. The air hummed with anticipation, that particular voltage that precedes either triumph or destruction. Dalton stood at his grill, charcoal, glowing like a bed of fallen stars. He had dressed simply, the same apron he wore every day, the same worn boots. Emma stood beside him, her station arranged with surgical precision, peppers in gradient from green to red, asparagus bundled with twine, corn still in husks he'd soaked in water, portobello mushrooms the size of dinner plates, zucchini sliced lengthwise to expose their pale interior flesh. No synthesizers, no molecular dispensers, just fire and time and the knowledge passed down through generations who had no other choice but to understand. Tyrex occupied the highest platform, his crystalline body refracting the stage lights into rainbows that danced across the crowd. Beside him sat Ambassador Vorin, and beside Vorin, Kessara, her skin flickering between curious yellow and dismissive blue. She whispered something to her father, who nodded, without expression. The crowd settled into expectant silence. Miraven entered from the eastern passage, and the air itself seemed to bow. She was ancient, even by Valorian standards. Her skin like parchment stretched over silver bones. Her eyes were clouded with centuries, but they missed nothing. She moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had outlived empires, who had tasted dishes prepared by chefs long dead, whose opinion could elevate or destroy with a single word. She wore robes of deep violet, unadorned. No jewelry, no pretense. She was the judgment itself. Tyrex rose, gesturing grandly. Esteemed Miraven, we gather to witness whether primitive fire holds any value in our enlightened age. The human claims his methods have worth. We shall see. Miraven did not acknowledge him. She descended to the grill level, her eyes fixed on Dalton. She had never tasted cooked food. In her 237 years, every meal had been molecularly precise, calibrated to her physiology, designed to nourish without surprise. She stopped 3 paces from the grill. The charcoal's heat reached her like a memory from someone else's life. Begin, she said. Her voice was dust and wind. Dalton nodded to Emma. Together, they moved. He laid peppers on the grate, their skins tightening immediately in the heat. Emma brushed asparagus with oil infused with garlic she had crushed herself. Dalton placed corn directly on coals, the husks blackening, steam escaping in fragrant clouds. The crowd leaned forward. Smoke rose, carrying with it the smell of transformation. Dalton turned the peppers with his bare fingers, feeling for the moment when resistance became surrender. His hands knew, they had always known. Miraven watched, her ancient eyes reflecting flames, and for the first time in a century, something in her expression shifted. The pepper blistered, its skin bubbling into constellations of char. Dalton lifted it with tongs, rotating it until every surface had kissed the flame. The flesh beneath softened, surrendering its moisture to heat, concentrating everything essential into something smaller, truer. He set it on a plain white plate, no garnish, no architecture, just the pepper in its transformed state. Emma peeled back the blackened skin with a paring knife, revealing the tender flesh beneath. Steam rose, carrying the scent of smoke and sweetness, of earth remembering sunlight. She sliced it into strips, the seeds glistening like scattered amber, and arranged them simply. Dalton drizzled olive oil, added a whisper of sea salt harvested from Earth's dying oceans, and carried the plate to Miraven. The crowd held its breath. Miraven studied the offering. Her nostrils flared slightly, processing information her species had abandoned processing generations ago. The char looked like damage to her, like something failed. The oil pooled in ways molecular cuisine never allowed, messy, unpredictable, alive. She lifted a strip with the silver fork, provided. It trembled slightly, not from her hand, but from its own heat, its own existence. She brought it to her lips. The pavilion disappeared into absolute silence. Miraven bit down. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. She chewed slowly, her ancient jaw working through texture no Valorian had experienced in living memory. The pepper's flesh yielded, releasing its concentrated sugars. Its smoke touched bitterness. Its fundamental pepperness, intensified by fire, into something that could not exist without transformation. Then her eyes closed. A single tear formed in her left eye, hung suspended for a moment that stretched across the watching galaxy, and fell. The crowd gasped. Valorians did not cry. Their tear ducts had atrophied over millennia of emotional suppression, bred out through genetic optimization. Miraven had not cried in 237 years, had not cried since she was young and her home world still had weather, still had farms, still had food that grew in dirt instead of vats. The pepper tasted like that world. She opened her eyes, and they were wet with memory. She looked at Dalton, and something in her ancient face cracked, not breaking, but opening, like earth after the first rain. Again, she whispered. Dalton returned to the grill. Emma had prepared asparagus, the spears charred in diagonal lines, tender where fire had visited, still crisp where it had not. He plated 3 spears, their tips glistening with oil, their bodies striped like tigers. Miraven ate them one by one, slowly, her expression transforming with each bite. Tears continued to fall, silent and steady, carving paths down her silver cheeks. The crowd erupted in confused murmurs. Tyrex rose halfway from his seat, his crystalline plates grinding in agitation. Cassara stared, her skin cycling through colors without pattern, her understanding of the universe suddenly uncertain. And Dalton simply returned to his grill, turning corn, tending mushrooms, doing what he had always done, creating memory from fire. The corn came next, husks peeled back to reveal kernels blistered golden brown, some blackened at their peaks like tiny mountains touched by fire. Dalton cut the cob into sections, the steam escaping in sweet clouds. He handed one piece to Miraven, who held it with both hands, studying it as if it were a religious text. She bit directly into the kernels. They burst against her teeth, releasing their sugared heat, their earth memory, their sun storage transformed by flame into something that tasted like childhood on a world that no longer existed. Her tears came faster now, silent and unstoppable. A Kylorian merchant in the 3rd tier stood abruptly. "May I?" His voice cracked with something between curiosity and desperation. Tyrex moved to object, but Miraven raised one hand, still holding the corn. "Let them," she said quietly. The merchant descended. Then another alien followed, and another. A Valorian matriarch with coral-colored scales. A Threxian scientist whose species had not cooked food in 400 years. They came like pilgrims, drawn by something they could not name but recognized in their bones. Dalton looked at Emma. She nodded, already reaching for more vegetables. They worked in synchronized silence, father and daughter, their hands moving through practiced choreography. Dalton grilled portobello mushrooms until their edges crisped and their centers went soft as butter. Emma prepared zucchini, brushing each slice with herb-infused oil before her father laid them on the grate. The first merchant tasted grilled zucchini and made a sound no Kylorian had made in public for generations, something between a gasp and a sob. The crystalline structure of his shoulder plates actually shifted, color bleeding through like sunrise through ice. "I remember," he whispered. "My grandfather told me stories of harvest festivals, before the synthesis wars, before we decided efficiency mattered more than memory." The Valorian matriarch tried a mushroom. Her pupils dilated so wide they swallowed her irises. She sat down on the floor, uncaring of her expensive robes, and wept openly. One by one, aliens tasted what Dalton offered. Each experienced something molecular cuisine could never provide, not nostalgia manufactured through precise chemical triggers, but genuine memory unlocked by the ancient covenant between fire and food. They tasted their home worlds before industrialization. They tasted grandmother's hands and childhood summers and the moment before everything changed. Kasara watched from her platform beside her father. Her friends had abandoned her, drawn down to the grill by something stronger than social hierarchy. They stood in line with merchants and senators, waiting for a piece of charred corn, for a strip of pepper that had met flame and been transformed. She remained seated, her skin cycling through confused patterns. Blue uncertainty, red indignation, yellow fear. Her father, Ambassador Vorin, watched the crowd with calculating eyes, but even his diplomatic composure showed cracks. The galaxy was shifting, and it had started with a simple pepper. Kessera's hands gripped the railing. Her friends laughed through tears below, tasting burnt plants and finding them holy. And she sat alone, her certainty crumbling like ash. The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly. Like worshippers leaving a temple they wished to inhabit forever. They carried the taste of smoke and memory in their mouths, speaking in hushed tones, their eyes distant with recognition. Miraven remained longest, sitting on a simple stool beside the grill, holding an empty plate as if it were precious metal. "Thank you," she said to Dalton, "for returning something I did not know I had lost." She departed with the careful steps of someone carrying fragile cargo, her tears finally dry but her face forever changed. The pavilion emptied. Tyrex had fled an hour earlier, his crystalline body refracting nothing but defeat. Ambassador Vorin had departed without a word, though his eyes lingered on the grill with an expression Dalton could not read. Emma cleaned the grates with quiet efficiency, scraping away the char and ash, preparing for tomorrow. Dalton packed away his tools, wrapping each one with the care of a priest handling relics. A sound made him turn. Kasara stood at the barrier, alone. Her skin had settled into a muted gray, the Zenari color of vulnerability. She was not flickering, not cycling through emotions. She was still, and that stillness spoke louder than any color could. Dalton set down the tongs. Emma paused in her cleaning. "May I?" Kessera began, then stopped. Her voice was different, smaller, stripped of the theatrical cruelty she had worn like armor. "May I try?" Dalton glanced at Emma, who nodded slightly. He looked back at Kessera. "The grill is closed for the night." "I know." Kessera's hands twisted together, a gesture of uncertainty that did not match the arrogant girl who had mocked him days before. I need to understand." Dalton studied her. He could send her away. He could make her wait, make her earn what others had received freely. But Sophia's voice whispered in his memory. The way she always said that hunger, real hunger, deserves an answer. He returned to the grill, rekindled the coals with a few breaths of air, and selected a single red pepper from the remaining vegetables. Emma watched silently, understanding passing between father and daughter without words. Dalton grilled the pepper with the same attention he had given Miraven's. No shortcuts, no compromises. He turned it until the skin blackened, until the flesh surrendered, until fire had asked the pepper every question and received every answer. He peeled it, sliced it, plated it simply. Kessera approached the barrier. Dalton brought the plate to her, setting it on the ledge. She picked up a strip with trembling fingers, her skin flickering between gray and pale blue. She ate. Her eyes widened, then closed. Her skin fled brilliant gold, the Zenari expression of profound joy, and tears began to fall, clear and hot against her cheeks. "My grandmother," she whispered. "She used to tell me about gardens. Before Zenari became a city world, I thought they were just stories. They were memories," Dalton said gently, and Kessera wept for everything her people had forgotten. The summons arrived the next morning, delivered by a courier whose movements carried the precision of diplomatic protocol. Ambassador Vorin requested Dalton's presence in his private quarters that evening. Not a command, a request. The distinction mattered. Emma helped him select vegetables from their dwindling supply, choosing each one with the gravity of someone preparing for ceremony. They did not speak much. The work held its own language. Vorin's quarters occupied an entire wing of the diplomatic sector, rooms that flowed into one another like water, decorated with artifacts from a dozen conquered worlds. But the dining space where he waited was small, intimate, designed for two. A father and daughter table. Kesra sat across from her father, her skin a neutral beige, unreadable. She did not look at Dalton when he entered, but her hands rested flat on the table, still, waiting. Vorin stood. He was tall, his presence filling the room despite his silence. "Please," he gestured to the small kitchen area attached to the dining space. "My daughter has asked for something I cannot provide. I am told you can." Dalton set down his equipment. The kitchen was designed for synthesis, every surface sterile and cold. But there was a ventilation shaft, and where there was ventilation, fire could breathe. He assembled his portable grill, the small one he used for testing. Emma arranged vegetables on the counter, her movements economical and sure. Vorin watched from the doorway, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes tracked every motion. "What did Tyrex say?" Dalton asked as he lit the Tyrex. "Charcoal. After yesterday. That you had manipulated Miraven with chemical compounds in the smoke," Vorin replied. "That the emotional response was manufactured nostalgia, a trick of human desperation." "And what did Miraven say?" Vorin's skin flickered slightly, the first crack in his diplomatic armor. "She declared your work culinary archaeology. She said you were returning the galaxy to what it forgot. Then she submitted her resignation from the Culinary Council and booked passage to her home world, to see if the gardens remain, to see if she can remember how to plant them." Dalton placed peppers on the grill. They hissed and blistered, their transformation beginning. "Do you believe, Tyrex, that this is manipulation?" Vorin moved to the table and sat across from his daughter. He looked at her, really looked, perhaps for the first time in years. "I believe my daughter cried last night. Zenari do not cry easily. Our emotions are regulated through skin pigmentation. Tears require something that bypasses our evolution." He paused, watching the smoke rise. "I believe she asked me if I remembered my mother's cooking, and I realized I had no answer. We erased those memories when we optimized our food production. We told ourselves it was progress." Kasara's hand crossed the table, finding her father's. "Was it?" she asked quietly. Vorin's skin flickered through a dozen shades before settling on deep blue, the Zenari color of profound sadness. "No," he whispered. "I do not think it was." 3 months passed like smoke dissipating into clear air. The grand pavilion transformed in ways both visible and subtle. Dalton's corner grill no longer stood alone. 2 additional grills had been installed, operated by aliens who had begged to learn, who had traded prestige for the privilege of understanding fire. Tyrex had departed the station without ceremony, his crystalline certainty shattered. The Culinary Council restructured itself, adding a new position. Keeper of traditional methods. Miraven nominated Dalton. He declined, and suggested they offer it to someone willing to travel between worlds, documenting cooking practices before they vanished entirely. They chose a young Valorian named Sethis, who wept when she accepted. Emma grew 3 inches and learned to turn peppers without burning her fingers. She taught a class on vegetable selection every 7th day, attended by alien children whose parents wanted them to understand that food was more than fuel, that memory lived in the things we consumed with intention. Kasara became Dalton's apprentice in everything but title. She arrived each morning before the pavilion opened, her skin cycling through eager yellows and curious greens. She learned to read the coals, to understand that fire was a conversation, not a command. Her hands, bred for diplomatic gestures, discovered the satisfaction of work that left them smelling like smoke and earth. Ambassador Vorin visited twice weekly, sitting at the corner table Dalton had, reserved for him. He never ordered from the molecular menu. He ate grilled vegetables and asked questions about his mother, about gardens, about the Zenari world before cities swallowed the soil. Dalton answered what he could. The rest, he let the food explain. On a morning when 3 moons aligned outside the pavilion's windows, Kesara arrived carrying a small wooden box. Inside were seeds, Zenari vegetables, her grandmother had preserved before the optimization, before the forgetting. "Can we grow them?" she asked. "Here." The station had a hydroponics bay, sterile and efficient. But Dalton had heard rumors of an abandoned cargo hold, one with damaged environmental seals that leaked atmosphere slowly enough to ignore but fast enough to prevent official use. They found it on the lower decks. Emma, Kesara, and Dalton stood in the empty space, feeling the slight breath of air that moved through the cracks, the ghost of weather on a ship that had never known wind. Together, they filled containers with soil Dalton had been saving. They planted Zenari seeds next to Earth heirloom tomatoes. Kesara's hands pressed the seeds into darkness, and Dalton taught her the prayer Sophia had taught him, the one that asked the Earth to remember what it knew. 6 weeks later, the first sprouts emerged. Kesara stood before them at dawn, her skin radiating pure gold, tears streaming down her face. Dalton placed a hand on her shoulder. "Fire doesn't destroy," he said quietly. "It reveals what was always there, waiting to be tasted." And in a corner of a station spinning through the void, a garden began to grow, tended by hands that had finally remembered how to be gentle.